Hi, I'm Veronica Nine, the Chief Economist at the Fertilizer Institute. Feels like every time we do one of these videos, it's because we're talking about some event that has added additional volatility to the fertilizer market. Well, today is no different. It's March 5th, and the Iran-Israel conflict has now been going on for several days. And it's added a lot of volatility to the fertilizer market. I know we're not alone in that, but the fertilizer market is really exposed to this conflict, a lot like the energy market, but I don't think we're getting quite as much attention. And I'd like to go through a few of the details to explain why we're as exposed as we are. The United States relies on a mix of imports and domestic production to supply domestic demand for fertilizer. And when we're looking at this conflict, there's a number of fertilizer products that are really exposed in the global marketplace. Predominantly, we're thinking about ammonia, urea, phosphate fertilizers, and sulfur. Production and imports of fertilizers occur every month, so that building of supply is ongoing. So there's ongoing exposure to this limitation of supply that is now occurring in the global marketplace because of the conflict that is now occurring. So what is that limitation, and what's that exposure globally? On the ammonia front, about 25% of global exports of ammonia are in the conflict region, and that we're defining that as being either Iran or Israel or the countries within the region that rely on a narrow transportation channel known as the Strait of Hormuz, which is impacted because it is adjacent to Iran and is controlled by Iran. It accounts for about 25% of exports of processed phosphates. It accounts for nearly 50% of exports of urea and nearly 50% of exports of sulfur. So certainly the global market is dependent on this region for product. And so what's happening right now, I think, is the market is trying to decide and run different scenarios for, is this conflict going to last a week? Is it going to last a month? Is it going to stretch out for a longer period? How long is the Strait of Hormuz going to be closed? How much damage might there be done to production facilities within the region? How much damage might there be done to export terminals within the region? So there's a lot of volatility, a lot of unknowns right now. And the market, I think, is really trying to work through different scenarios for what that might mean for future availability. I think and that's not unique to the United States, of course. That's the entire global market, thinking about not what it looks like today on March 5th, but what it looks like for the next month, for the next several months. How do we look at supply over the rest of the year? Certainly, we all remember 2020 and what now seems amusing, but at the moment was incredibly stressful, the run on toilet paper. We certainly don't want that sort of a situation occurring in fertilizer. So the global supply chain is really being thoughtful at the moment and thinking about how do we manage those supplies given different scenarios for the length of timing of the closure of the strait. The other complicating factor is not just in fertilizer, but in the feedstocks utilized to produce fertilizer. Of course, as we think about sulfur, it's a fertilizer in and of itself, but it's also an input to the production of phosphates. So when we see elevated prices on sulfur, there's a secondary impact on the price of phosphates, but also importantly in natural gas. So of course the US, we don't import a lot of natural gas, but regions like the EU certainly do. Qatar is the fourth largest export of natural gas in the world. They account for about 10% of global exports of natural gas. When the conflict first was initiated, within a couple of days, the EU natural gas price doubled. The last time we saw spikes like this was back in 2022. And once those spikes really lasted for a considerable amount of time, the impact was that we saw reductions in ammonia production in the EU. And then the next impact was that, of course, European farmers still needed nitrogen fertilizer. So when they didn't have it domestically, they started importing nitrogen fertilizer from other places, further constraining the nitrogen market. So certainly that is an additional challenging impact to this. The longer the conflict continues, the more significant the damage that there might be to LNG export terminals, the more complicated the question becomes. I think something else that needs to really be thought through and given good consideration is even when the strait reopens and safe passage is guaranteed, insurance premiums for passage of vessels through that strait are likely to increase as we think about the relative value of different cargoes that might transit through the strait, and therefore the timing of vessels and which ones will get priority. It's likely that perhaps those oil vessels might go before those fertilizer vessels, and therefore those shipments will likely not, it's likely not to be a faucet where they will immediately flow through and those supplies will be available to the market as previously expected. I think something else that is maybe still being thought through in the marketplace is, even though the U.S. is certainly sourcing product from some of the affected countries, Saudi Arabia, which is within the affected region, they're our largest supplier of processed phosphates in the United States from an import perspective. There's other products, for say sulfur, that we don't really import a ton of product from the region. But what happens in that region, and therefore the amount of product that it is supplying to the global market, has a huge impact on the price of global sulfur, and therefore the price of sulfur in the United States. So as we're thinking about safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, ultimately it doesn't really matter necessarily if that vessel is U.S. flagged, whether the shipping company is a U.S. company, or whether the cargo is destined for the United States. If safe passage cannot be guaranteed, the impact will be felt in the United States via a heightened global sulfur price because of the impact to the global market. The market is really trying to sort through timing considerations in a number of different ways related to the potential length of the conflict, the potential length of delays through the Strait of Hormuz, and that's in the United States, that's around the world, and we're certainly seeing that both in prices and in anxiety throughout the supply chain and in the growing community that our members are supplying. So I know there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety. We're there with you, and we're all hopeful for a quick resolution and for more market information as soon as it's available. Please do consider TFI a resource. We're happy to answer questions. Please do reach out, and I hope the next time we have one of these videos, I'm back with better information, with happier information. Thanks so much for joining me.